How a Romance Novel Saved the Galaxy by Ariana Derrote. Chapter 75, Femor 8. Femor and Crichton had started out by eliminating any core members who lived on the Sunrider, staying around long enough to also exclude any Explore Corps members who visited occasionally. This resulted in him learning way too many secrets about the Corps, from their hidden spouses and children to the frankly weird situations some of them got into. The older Explore Corps member, who had sheepishly admitted they were the ruler of a small planet in unexplored space because they were accidentally married to the ghost of their king, probably took the cake, but there was a whole host of less damning core secrets he was now privy to, courtesy of his investigation and Takri's gossip. While that cleared about half of the list of potential suspects, it meant that Femor and Crichton needed to venture out into the wider galaxy again to investigate the rest. He'd really hoped the Mando Jedi Hollow contest had died down by this point, but it was not to be. He got cornered for another Hollow, visiting a MedCorps unit stationed in the lower levels of Corellia, then again on Ryloth, checking in on a remote Ejukor outpost. The MedCorps member turned out to be in a long-term partnership with a Jedi member of the Corellian Temple, while the Ejukor members were rather blatantly running a freedom house, resettling freed Twi'lek slaves. Neither of them were the author of the book. Crichton had expressed his surprise at how many inner and mid-rim planets they were visiting, but the Agri-Edu MediCorps were actually split pretty evenly across the galaxy despite their low numbers. They went where they were needed and could be supported, so there weren't actually as many in the Outer Rim as you'd expect. In the meantime, they'd heard about the rout of Deathwatch from Concordia. Femor was hopeful that Deathwatch wouldn't be able to spare any extra forces to hunt for and attack the author. Their next location was the planet of Onderon. The king, Ramses Dendup, had been funding an Ejukor school in the poorest district of his capital city, Iziz, since he came to power. Fourth highest on Takri's list was the Jedi station to teach there, Mirabel Lewanag. Takri didn't know if she was in a relationship, but listed her as a romantic who adored her students and spent a lot of time teaching creative writing. Iziz's spaceport was up against one of the inner walls of the walled city. Femor had debated having them both go into the city in disguise, but this was an inner rim planet, so a lone visiting Jedi with a non-Mandalorian friend wouldn't stand out. He regretted it immediately when he caught sight of a Mandalorian in bright pink and yellow armor taking a hollow with him in the background. Sighing, he pulled up his hood and hurried towards the city's slums. Crichton followed a few feet behind him, covering his back, but Femor could sense the man's amusement. Not one of the Mandalorians who had identified Femor, even when he'd been dressed as a spacer on Ryloth, had ever clocked Crichton as Mandalorian. It was just Femor and his highly recognizable face, due to being the subject of the first Mandalorian Jedi Hollow in the contest, who was compromising mission security. The Force hadn't indicated he was being closely followed, at least, so with the Death Watch busy running away with their tail between their legs, he was fairly sure it wasn't as disastrous as it felt every time some Mandalorian recognized it. Judging by the state of the poor district where the school was located, King Dendup was doing a good job. The streets were clean and free of beggars. The buildings were obviously in need of repair, clothes were threadbare, and those were definitely illegal jungle products Femor spotted being sold, but overall, Femor had seen a lot worse over the years. The school had open doors decorated with colorful handprints from small hands of a variety of species. On the wall in big letters was the proclamation that the school was free to all children living in the city. Lewanag supposedly lived in some of the back upstairs rooms. Femor and Crichton headed inside the open doors, though Femor did pause to rap against the door lintel to let someone know they were entering. It was a useless gesture, since no one was inside what looked to be a large children's play area. Climbing bars and a slide were near one side of the big room with a sunroof in the middle. The outlines of lines, numbers, and circles for children's games were painted on the Duracrete floor, and a big sandbox dominated one corner. There was a set of double doors on the other side of the room from which he could hear an adult talking. Femor walked over. There were small windows in the doors, and through them he could see a large classroom, which was divided into sections by movable dividers. He couldn't see the teacher, but children of similar ages were grouped together. Crichton tapped on his arm. When Feymour looked at him, he gestured towards a large bulletin board against the wall behind them, near the exit gate. It took Feymour a moment to look beyond notices about free school lunches and a music club to see the copious student drawings which surrounded the more official announcements. The one Crichton drew his attention to had what could only be a crudely drawn Mandalorian flying a child in their arms while using a jetpack. Careful scanning of the other drawings revealed the Mandalorian in the same green and brown armor was a semi-regular visitor to the school. Of course, it could just be that a local Mandalorian loved to hang out with the kids or had adopted one or more of the attendees of the school, but Feymour had a feeling that the Force concurred with. "Looks like we're in the right place," said Crichton.
"I agree," said Feymour. "We'll wait for classes to finish, then talk to her."
It was mid-afternoon, and classes were probably ending soon. Sure enough, he and Crichton only waited a half hour before a horde of excited children streamed into the play area. Many ran immediately to play, but Feymour's robes drew some attention and sent one extremely loud human kid yelling back into the classroom about a Jedi. Maribel Liwanag, when she appeared, had thick black locks of hair which were bound into braids that emerged in braided loops from the sides of her head. She had a toddler on her hip and looked a little frazzled. Feymour was reminded of the crush masters at the end of a long day.
"Greetings. I'm Jedi Maribel Liwanag. How can I help you, Jedi?"
"Knight Feymour, at your service. He, him,"
Feymour said with a bow.
"This is Crichton Tassa, who is aiding me on my mission."
Maribel's eyes focused in on Crichton.
"Clan Tassa?"
Crichton's armor was in a pack on his back, so Feymour had no idea what had given him away. On the plus side, Maribel had also given herself away to recognize a Mandalorian clan name. "Yes, ma'am," said Crichton. He glanced over at Feymour for permission before speaking again. "Your writing has been making quite the stir." She wasn't prone to blushing. Feymour would give her that. Instead, she turned her attention to the toddler in her arms.
"Yes, this is Jedi Knight Feymour. Can you say Feymour?"
"Feymour?"
"That's good. He and his friend Crichton will be staying for dinner."
"Crichton?"
"Yes, they're a Mandalorian like your brother. Can you show them our home for me?"
The child nodded, climbing down from her arms to go take Crichton's much larger hand in theirs.
"It will take a while for all the children to be picked up, but you're welcome in our home when you want. We'll have dinner, and then we can talk."
Crichton was already being pulled across the play area. Feymour paused, reaching into the Force for reassurance that Maribel wasn't going to run or some other such action. He felt nothing.
"My red door will be home by then,"
added Maribel with a wink. Right, she really had no intention of running. Dinner was a chaotic affair, made more so by the fact that apparently not one but 4 of the children were Maribels. They ranged in age and species, and apparently were used to having even more people over for dinner regularly, since they regarded the new Jedi and Mandalorian in their midst with only perfunctory interest before telling their parents all about their day, despite Maribel at least having been there for most of it. Crichton had been encouraged by Maribel to put his armor on and be comfortable before dinner. The little one, Jace, had then taken a shine to him, obviously reminded of his father's armor, but Crichton was abandoned as soon as the boy's burr came home. Unlike the more child-crazy Mandalorians, Crichton wasn't put out by the action. Their other parent was, as Feymour had suspected, a Mandalorian in green and brown armor. He came home right before dinner, carrying a bushel of some sort of yellow fruit. His name was Talon Bralor, and he apparently made his money by acting as a guard and guide for tourists who wanted to see Onderon's famous jungle wildlife. Dinner was cleaned up and the children had to get ready for bed before the adults could finally settle down on couches in the second-floor living room to talk.
"You're here about the book," began Maribel.
"I am," said Feymour. "The council wanted to offer the author of the Mandalorians' dilemma protection from their fans in Death Watch, maybe even the new Mandalorians."
"And I suspect they were quite curious as to who wrote the book," added Maribel wryly.
"That wasn't a stated reason, but you know the council."
There were often unspoken orders underneath the more obvious ones.
It was a reason given by the Mandalore, which is why Crichton is with me."
Maribel exchanged a look with Talon.
Well, we won't deny it. Talon and I worked hard on that book, and it was really thrilling how it took off, even though our fans and haters are being a bit much at this point. We only published anonymously to avoid censure from the Jedi Council, but it's been working well to protect us and the children. I can show you several threats we've received via our publisher from Tor Vizsla and a leader on Mandalore, who is obviously Governor Almec of the new Mandalorians.
It seems everyone had been a little correct about the author of the book. The accuracy about Jedi and Mandalorian culture came from the Jedi and Mandalorian authors, and Maribel did show an interest in ancient history when she was at the temple, according to Takari. Femor wouldn't be surprised if Talon were a history buff as well.
"I will have to inform the Jedi Council, but I don't think you need to be too worried about censure," said Femor. "The Force seems to want Jedi to have closer ties with Mandalorians."
Femor had to believe that despite all the craziness the Mandalorians' reaction to the book had thrown into the Jedi's lives, the Force would have warned them to stay away from the Mandalorians by now if they were in danger from this new meeting of cultures.
We're pretty certain at least some Jedi already know,
admitted Maribel.
"Takari did suggest your name, but you didn't seem aware you were the author. Or, well, one of them,"
said Femor, a bit apologetically, unsure if the woman knew how much information Takari had suggested on her.
Maribel frowned. That's not what I mean.
Her husband held out his arm with his vambrace and pressed a button. The hollow shimmered into view of 3 bolded words. Change the title!
Talon sliced it back to wings sent through the Jedi comnet. It originated in the Terabe sector. The message arrived just as we'd decided on a title and were about to send it off to our publisher several months ago. We were going to call it The Mandalorian and the Jedi, but once we got this message, it seemed like the Forces willed that we go with our second choice, The Mandalorian's Dilemma. I'm not sure if it made any difference, but some Jedi went to a lot of effort to send that message.
The Terabe sector was a barren sector on the edge of the unknown regions, so it shouldn't be too hard to track down which Jedi were in the sector several months ago. Femur wasn't sure if he really needed to as part of his mission, but he was curious who would known and broken their silence in such a strange way.
"I'll look into it," he promised. "But until then, I've been tasked with your protection, so if you could give me access to the comm messages sent to Morad Damor, I'll sort through them and see which are credible. Fortunately, Almec has been jailed for other crimes, and Death Watch were taken down on
The Force surged. He pulled out his lightsaber and had it ignited, blocking the blaster shot that shattered the window and came straight towards Talon. It probably wasn't necessary, considering the man was still wearing his chest plate, but better safe than sorry. Maribel scrambled to pull her own lightsaber out a few seconds later, obviously unused to combat after so many years in Ijugor. Femor was up and facing the window, blocking another shot. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see better in the dusky twilight. There! A helmeted head and a long rifle barrel perched on the roof of a nearby building. Go! The Force was urging him. He deflected another shot, hitting the stucco below the shooter.
"Barricade yourselves and the children in a defensible room,"
he ordered Maribel. She nodded. Talon handed Crichton his jetpack before running to get their kids. Crichton signed ready at him as Femor sent a shot pinging back onto the shooter's helmet. They fell back.
"Let's go!" Femor launched himself out of the window.
The air was silent around them. The jetty must have taken care of the last shooter before they both fell. After a long moment, the jetty pushed themselves up so they were sitting, Nered in their
Gargan lap.
You don't seem to be part of that other group, mused the jetty. They bowed their head, showing untamed waves of salt and pepper air. My thanks for coming to the rescue. I'm Jedi Master Hiam Ikeoji, and the little one is Kiri. May we have your name? No! Nared was uncomfortably aware of how one of the Jedi's arms was supporting Nared's lower back, as if having a Mandalorian in their lap was a natural occurrence. He got his feet under him and pushed off, wanting to get away from the Jetty's piercing gray eyes.